So welcome to this DAFEUS webcast. Today we are talking about debate on the future of the European Union, and I'm talking to Professor Wessels, who is the director of the Center for Turkey and European Union Studies. So this year the conference on the future of the European Union will take place, and the conference aims to identify which kind of reforms at the policy and at the institutional level within the European Union can be implemented. So maybe we can start by looking at the current state of the debate. So which topics will the conference cover?
I think that's open. So far we can see. What we saw is that the European Parliament and the Council could not agree for a long time on the chairperson of it. Now they have found an institutional way to deal with this issue, one of these typical compromises, unfortunately for an issue which has no major importance. I think it might have been good to have one person, but apparently there was not enough agreement on this. So we don't know yet what will come. I mean, the agenda is very broad as far as I see, and I guess we will come back to what we know from the Constitutional Convention in the first years of the last decade, of the, let's say, beginning of this century. And we will see that this kind of conference will, of course, develop their own ideas and their own concepts. And that's hopefully, I hope that this is the case, because it should not be just dealing with a set of pre-formulated questions.
You have already mentioned that the EU institutions have agreed on the chair of the conference, namely the presidents of the Commission, the Parliament, and the European Council. So what role can we expect from the European Council, where the head of state of governments will take a leading function for the conference?
It's difficult to predict, because we don't know what individual members of the European Council would like to see. I think generally they are very skeptical about that what the conference could do. They might reflect the idea, we know what is on the agenda, we know what is good for this European Union, and this conference, yeah, we were forced to accept it given certain democratic pressures, but we might not be too enthusiastic about it, which would be a typical position of the European Council. And my point would be, it's good that apparently the debate gets more open. And so let's say I don't share their skepticism. I don't know what will come out, what kind of impact it has, but to have some kind of broader debate, I think is useful.
So you don't think that you are able to predict that there will be a reform of the European Union as a real outcome of the conference?
I mean, the question is what means reform? One would be treaty reform. Therefore, there is a special article which would also lead to have some kind of convention. And then you could look for which articles are going to be changed. Now, I think nobody in the moment wants to go ahead with this kind of issue, because the ideas are very controversial. If what should be done more or also less in Europe. So I think to open the Pandora box will not lead to some kind of reasonable outcome. That's a difference to the early decade of this century, where you had the impression that even though you had quite different ideas about the role of the European Parliament or European Council, at the end there was a very shared feeling, we need to do something, given that we are moving from 15 to 25 and then to 29, 28 even. So I think that's, let's say, different in the context, in the mood, and therefore I think we should be careful not to expect too much.
When we look at the current situation within the European Union, we are currently in a crisis, and crises in the European Union have often led to new reform processes and debates on governance structures, packages. So how do you assess the effect of the current corona pandemic on the debate on the future of the European Union?
No, I think it's very important. First of all, so far at least, we don't know what will happen with vaccination now and the impact on perhaps unequal vaccination. The process after first very national reaction have led to a common understanding. Yes, we need to do things together. We need to tackle especially economic and social consequences. We need to look for how we can best organize the health, the vaccination, etc. So I think on one side, the feeling that it's a community, to take this classical term, I think has been reinforced. I think that's was one point that's important. A second point then linked to this is what really are the needs or the need to reform. So for example, that health policy is a very weak competence. So the union cannot legislate in the area of health policy, and but only support national measures. So that might be a starting point for a limited treaty revision, that from the crisis you see which areas, which policy fields could be better regulated. I would not exclude that, but again, as soon as you open the Pandora box, quite a lot of others will come in, but then we need to change this, and I see a lot of different concepts and ideas coming up, which would more or less block any serious way forward.
You mentioned that the first reactions to the corona pandemic has been solely national reactions, but I think the corona crisis has also highlighted the relevance of all federal levels within the European Union for the decision-making processes within the European Union. Do you think that a development towards a more federal Europe is thinkable?
It's always, again, I would come back, but that's, let's say, perhaps the weak points of academics, that they first would ask what means federal. Yeah? If we argue a little bit United States of America as model for the EU, I think that was a debate in the beginning of the 50s, but I think this is not taken serious anymore. So I would claim very much that we have a very federal structure already. I mean, if you compare how legislation is done by the European Parliament together, co-decision with the Council on proposal of the Commission, I think that's a very federal structure. You see that also the conferral, that's the technical terms, the allocation of competences by the member states on the European Union. You see quite a lot of key core national policies, core state policies, state powers being already to a certain degree conferred to the European Union. So let's say I would claim we have already a couple of elements which we see there, which of course can be still improved and added. So especially the European Council is seen by many as, let's say, not a federal body, but just the reputation of classical national interest policy, defending sovereignty. We would see that the European Council has not defended national sovereignty, but as they wanted to solve problems, they have sometimes broken taboos for what it was seen for a long time as the national veto position. So let's say, I think the crisis has shown that there are a lot of elements being done and progress, and the question is how to, let's say, find new ways to do so. My own understanding is very much that we should not downgrade the engagement of national governments, or especially the national political leaders. At least for the moment, they have a major say nationally. And so to get them together in the European Council, I think, given the present situation in Europe, is a major, major success, I would say, and a major precondition that we are doing things together.
Mm-hmm. I have one last question. What do you think? Which kind of challenges will the European Union face in the following years?
Yeah, this kind of question, you can only be wrong. Just imagine you were to have raised this question a year ago. That means before Corona really set in, you would say, what kind of dreamer are you? And that's general experiences, that in politics, things are moving. We saw the migration issue, for example. We will now see a stronger competition between the world powers, and the question, where is Europe? Where can the EU be concerned there? So how can the EU influence in the sense of multilateralism, the international trade, monetary, but also beyond perhaps security issues? So that will be a strong challenge. Then, of course, we don't know what will be really the economic and social consequences of the corona. And there you can have a lot of speculation and scenarios. Some would argue, oh, as soon as everybody's vaccinated, then we return to the old normalcy. The airplanes to Mediterranean beaches are full of passengers. We will have a lot of people going to restaurants, etc. So let's say people might then say, oh, after, let's say, surviving that and after finding some ways to deal with that in the everyday life, we return to old patterns. Others might say, no, there's a new normalcy, and then we don't know what really are the consequences for the European Union. We have also very few indicators how the way the governments all over Europe deal with the corona crisis has an impact on national elections. You got for a certain time last year the impression that this was reinforcing national governments, or governments in power. But this might have changed in between. So we might be faced with changes, considerable changes in the national composition, and therefore, let's say, the way member states want to defend their interests or bring in their interests. You see, I have a lot of different challenges on the multi-level system. I would be a little bit hesitant to say which is the major driving force, because you can be rather wrong in this. That's one of my experience over decades of looking at this European Union, that you were surprised what was suddenly happening. And the famous saying, the decision was taken, was unavoidable, but unthinkable 3 months ago. So let's say I like this kind of idea that in some crisis you need to invent or to get to positions which you thought they are not politically acceptable, and there's no way to get to this. But I would claim that we will get other of these, let's say, challenges, and it would be very difficult to predict which one will come up when in our considerations.
Yeah, thank you very much. This was a lot of food for thought. Thank you very much for your time.